It's so wonderful to be here, and this is my fourth year here, and it really feels like a family. It's really, really fantastic to be here. And last night we had this amazing graduation, and I want to just acknowledge and congratulate all those who graduated, who are still here. Fantastic job! You're going out into the world. There's a beautiful ceremony, and actually all of you who are here to do inner work and take it out into the world to create peace, love, compassion, cooperation. I know that's what this ashram is all about, so let's give all of each other a good hand. Thanks. And Meenakshi promised there would be a cat here tonight, so that we're well represented by the wildlife kingdom too. So it's really wonderful to be here. There's always such incredible energy and spirit about this place, and I I wanted to start by talking about a very different event I spoke at a month and a half ago, more or less. It was to a group of multi-billionaire real estate investors, hedge fund owners or managers in Orange County, Southern California, one of the most conservative places in the country. And, I was billed to be speaking about the consciousness revolution, like here. Someone else had arranged this for me, and I just sort of blindly signed a contract. And then a couple of weeks, about a month before I was supposed to speak, I actually read up on the place where I was speaking, and I had to call the organizers. I got them on a speakerphone, and I said, I think maybe you've got the wrong John Perkins. I'm going to talk about changing the economy and what a wreck it's in and how we've got to turn this thing around, that we're in a time of crisis. I don't think that's what these people want to hear. And they said, no, we've got the right John Perkins. Every other year we've had people talking about financial leverage and hedge funds and investing in this and that. And we want to shake our people up. Okay, I said, I think I can do that. So I get there, and I find that I'm at this absolutely, how's the word to put it, grossly luxurious resort, Pelican Hill in Southern California. Has anybody ever been there? Yeah, really? You know what I'm talking about then. This immense place that I check into my room, and I swear it was as big as my condominium at home. It could probably hold about 50 of these tents. My room, like, oh my Lord, do I really need this? And anyway, then finally, so I'm going to give the dinner speech for all these people. And, as we get to dinner, I discover that they've all spent all afternoon out playing golf in one of the best golf courses in the world, I'm told. I don't play golf, but that's what I was told. And now we're sitting down at dinner. They've just spent the last 2 hours at an open bar. We're sitting down to dinner, and I look around, and I say to the host who's sitting at the table with me, it looks like it's all white men here. And he says, no, there's a woman. There was. These are 90 people. There was 89 white men and one white woman. And then the waiter comes around, and he's serving the Chateaubriand, some steak dish, and I turn to the organizer and I say, but is there a vegetarian option? And he says, well, actually, all this beef is vegetarian. Range fed, he said, they've eaten nothing but wild grasses. Okay, so the wine is flowing, the steaks are being served, everybody's having a great time. And then I'm supposed to speak at about 9:30 at night. And after this, they're going to have a cigar rolling event with Scotch whiskey tasting, samples of Scotch whiskey from all over Scotland, I guess. Um, so by the time I get up to speak to these people, I'm wondering, is anybody really out there? Talk about mindful, but they seemed very attentive. That's probably because that's what they learned in business school, that you can drink and eat an awful lot and still look very attentive. And so I'm giving this talk about how the world's in crisis, and the glaciers are melting and the oceans are rising, and we've got to do something better. We've got to turn this death economy into a life economy. I'll be talking more about that tonight and especially tomorrow night. And we've just got to create a better world. And everybody seems to be listening, but I'm standing up there thinking, it suddenly occurred to me that they're all looking around and they're saying, does it get any better than this? And that's the mindset. But then afterwards, I spent another day with the organizers and other people. And afterwards, I actually found that those people, like so many business people, I speak at a lot of business conventions. So I have these two sides. There's the shamanic side. I speak at, plant consciousness conferences. I was just at one in London, and then I speak at corporate conferences. And I find that these corporate executives are really worried, and they're not sure what to do about it. And when I ask these people, why do you invite somebody who wrote a book called Shapeshifting and Psychonavigation, and another one, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, well, why do you invite someone like that to your event, and the winner of the John Lennon Yoko Ono Peace Prize? And incidentally, I got to tell you, I wasn't the only one getting that prize that night. I was in Reykjavik, Iceland, and I was sharing the stage with not only with Yoko Ono, but also with Lady Gaga and Pussy Riot. Although Pussy Riot wasn't there because they were in prison in Russia. But anyway, it was quite a week. Lady Gaga and Yoko Ono in Reykjavik, Iceland. That's an experience. So I find that these people, they say, when I ask these corporate, get off of Lady Gaga now. When I ask these organizers, well, why are you inviting a guy who wrote books like Shapeshifting and Psychonavigation and Confessions of an Economic Hitman? And they say, our people are smart. They didn't rise to the top of corporations without a few brains. Salute. And they understand that everything's falling apart. They get it, and they don't know what to do about it. And so they're hoping that you will bring a new consciousness here to this. That's very exciting to think about that. And what I've come to realize is that there's really two realities, or at least two realities. There's the objective reality, this microphone, and the perceived reality, the words I'm speaking through this microphone. And human societies, we people, are completely, I would say completely molded by perceived reality. So how we perceive reality impacts the objective reality. What I say through this microphone impacts where this microphone leaves me around again tomorrow night, in my hands anyway. And then there's consciousness. And I think consciousness is waking up, as being aware of the two realities, the objective reality and the perceived reality, and of how they relate to each other. And I really believe that we're moving into an incredible period of higher consciousness. It's happening in all the indigenous cultures that I know of around the world, and I've studied with shamans on every continent except Antarctica, where there aren't any. And every one of them has prophecies that we've entered this time. And later tonight or tomorrow or during one of the workshops, I'll talk about the prophecies more. But that we are in this incredible time of waking up. And I just came here a couple of weeks ago. I was in Guatemala. I took 22 people. I take people on trips to the shamans of Colombia and the Amazon, Ecuador, and Guatemala, 3 or 4 different trips a year. And I'd love to have some of you come. Go to johnperkins.org, sign up. But 2 weeks ago, I was in Guatemala with 22 people with the Mayan shamans. Now there's 22 different Mayan linguistic groups. They have 22 different languages. But all of these different groups share fire ceremonies, very, very powerful fire ceremonies. And every one of the fire ceremony starts off like this. The shaman has a bag of sugar because sugar is considered to be very sacred. The sugarcane plant takes the water from the earth, purifies it even more. Human beings cut it, and then they put it through all the 4 physical elements, earth, air, water, fire, and turn it into sugar. And then the shaman takes the sugar. There are a lot of women shamans amongst the Mayans and men shamans. Either one of them takes the sugar and draws a big circle where they're going to put the fire. A circle of white sugar. And then the 4 directions, across, through, in the center of the circle, a big cross that goes from one end of the circle to the other. 4 directions, 4 elements. In each of the 4 quadrants, the shaman puts a little dot of sugar. And in the very center, where the cross comes together, a smaller circle. The 4 dots, the circle represents unity, obviously. That's the cross, the elements, and the 4 directions. The 4 dots represent the 4 times in Mayan mythology human beings have practically disappeared from the planet. One time was with water, floods. And the shamans, the women shamans are called nanas, and the men shamans are called tatas. The nanas and the tatas, when the floods came, shapeshifted human beings into birds. We flew above the floods. When the floods receded, shapeshifted back into humans. Another time it was fire, the great volcanoes exploding. And we shapeshifted, that's when we shapeshifted into birds. The fire, we flew above the fire. When there was water, we shapeshifted into fish, swam through the water, shapeshifted back to humans. With the fire, we shapeshifted into birds, afterwards shapeshifted back. Another time was when the earth opened up, terremotos, earthquakes, and we shapeshifted into bats and flew down into the caves and enjoyed ourselves there and then came back out as human beings. And what have I missed? Winds, the great hurricanes came through. We shapeshifted into monkeys and clung to the trees as the winds came through and then shapeshifted back. The circle in the middle of the cross represents now. For almost 2,000 years, the Mayan have predicted in their prophecies, which I will talk about later or tomorrow, that we are entering a new time of tremendous crisis where we're looking at human beings and many other species possibly vanishing again. We're at this time, it's a critical time. And this is the one time when it's our fault. The Mayans saw this coming. It's a long story there, but the short version is they saw this coming, and this time it's not about nature, it's about us. And how do we shapeshift out of that? Consciousness change. We change our perception of what it is to be human and what it is to live within nature on this planet. We change our perceived reality, and through that we change the objective reality. And that's one of the reasons that they invite us down there. These Mayan shamans have been coming out into the open for the last 20 years or so, really wanting us all to understand that. How do we move into this new era? What do we do as the shamans? You are here to go out into the world, to learn what you learn here, the yogic traditions here, and help yourself inwardly and go out outwardly into the world. What is it that we do to change consciousness? And I think as I've been hanging around here for my 4th year now and feeling the energy, the spirit of these 2 amazing individuals, and Swami Vishnu, who I think really, really got that about this is a time for tremendous change. It's a time to shake things up. It's a time to recognize that we must break through old barriers, perceived barriers. We must break through them and create a new consciousness. We must go out and create a consciousness that understands that we have to live in peace, harmony, love, that it's all about love. And, you know, in the chant that we were singing earlier, as we look at Shiva, the transformer, the one who tore things apart, who broke down things from the one era so that a new era could step in. I think we're at a time like that now. Shiva's here, very, very present right now. We're breaking through this. Siddhartha, the Buddha, totally understood that in order to go into the light, to be enlightened, you had to go through the dark first. And in fact, a lot of the shamans I work with talk about how when you think you're going through a dark tunnel, the dark soul of the night, whatever, and as a community, as a species, we're going through this dark tunnel now. Know that what it really is the birthing canal. We're birthing. We're coming out into the light. This is the time. Now, I travel around the world. I was just this morning, I was on Skype doing an interview with the biggest TV station in Turkey. They were in Istanbul. I was here. And, everywhere, people are shook up. Brexit, Turkey, Greece, Italy, Germany, France, Latin America, Russia, China, Asia. Of course, everything's just fine in the United States. Trump, I'm not going to talk much about it tonight, but I think this is all about shaking us up. It's time for us to really, really wake up because we've been sleeping. And as I write about it in books, I was an economic hitman. And I also understand what's one of the things that's fascinating to me about Swami Vishnu is that he was a soldier in the Indian Army that led him to this kind of to this form of enlightenment. I had a similar experience, not that I've gotten into the enlightenment yet, but I went through this experience as an economic hitman, which I'll talk more about tomorrow. And that helped me understand the problems that we've created in a global economy today. But we in the United States and most of Europe, probably most of the places most of you are from, have had our eyes closed. The world has been suffering. And my country has caused a lot of the suffering. The Pentagon, the CIA, the corporations, Washington. We've caused tremendous turmoil and suffering around the world, and most people in the United States haven't understood that. Now, it's come home to roost. Last year when I was speaking here, I said, I think what goes around comes, I know what goes around comes around. I think what's happening, this was a year ago, and we were moving into the election period. I think what we're really understanding now is that we're being hit. There's an economic hitman mentality out there. All the tools that we economic hitmen use in developing countries, debt has come home, I said last year, has come home to roost. Student debt, credit card debt, healthcare debt, dishonest bankers, Wall Street that's out to screw us all, a media that's controlled by a very few individuals, this fear that's imbued in us, or that they try to imbue in us, the fear of Muslims, the fear of Mexicans, the fear of anything that isn't us. It's them. It's their problem. We were feeling that last year. I said, I think we're being hit. Well, the big hit has come, and it's coming around the world. We are being hit. And personally, I think we need to be hit. I think Shiva's out there breaking down the old, telling us it's time to wake up. It's time to move forward. It's time to understand that we are in this circle that the Mayans have. We're in the little circle, this time of destruction, this time of crisis. We can look at it as a time of crisis, or we can look at it as a tremendous time of opportunity. The opportunity is here to create something that our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren will look back and honor us for. I have an 9-year-old grandson named Grant. And I'm very aware, every time I do something, every time I speak out, that he's listening. He's there. And he does listen a lot. He looks at me on YouTube and says, did you really mean that? Baba, he calls me Baba. I don't know where he came up with that. And anyway, so we're at this time of crisis. There's no question. The glaciers are melting. The oceans are rising. Species are going extinct. Half the world's starving or on the verge of starvation. 8 individuals have as many assets as half the world's population. That's a terrible situation. It needs to end. Shiva needs to come in. Shiva's here, wiping it out. We're Shiva. We're all here, wiping it out. And time now to move on. Let's see. I think if we look at this idea of changing consciousness, what do we really mean by that? What is a change of consciousness? A change in mindset, a change in the way that we look at science, technology, education, lifestyles. Hey, you're getting an amazing education here. But I know that the kind of education I got, which was touted as the best, the best schools in America, Europe, colleges. I went through it all. But that's half the problem. I mean, maybe that's all the problem. Those education systems have created this perception of success. What is success? We've defined success as being what? For the most part, I don't think this pertains to most of you, but for most of the people in the countries that most of us come from, success is all about material things. So I think it's fair to ask ourselves, how did we get here? How did we get to a state of affairs where we know from quantum physics, we know from chaos theory, we know from modern psychology, that perception really controls everything? There is no Bahamas. There is no United States. There's no Mexico, except as we perceive them. There's no culture. There's no religion, there's no economy, there's no corporation, except as we perceive them. And when enough people perceive something, or when it's codified into laws, it becomes a physical reality that then impacts lots of other things, but it all starts with perception. And if we look at how we moved into this, and I want to just take a moment to look at it from the standpoint of my country, the United States, because that's the one I can talk best about. If we look back at history, in 1773, everybody in America believed that the British were invincible. Totally. There was no question. The British are invincible. George Washington stood up before the Continental Congress, and he recalled a time 20 years earlier during the French and Indian War when he'd been with General Braddock at the Battle of the Monongahela in what today is Pennsylvania. And Braddock had a crack British army, one of the best in the world. He was considered one of the best generals in the world. Huge army. It was utterly defeated. Braddock was killed, and most of his men were killed or severely wounded by a handful of Indians, with a few French mingled in there. Washington stood up before the Continental Congress and said, "They're not invincible. All we got to do is hide behind trees." Change the perception of warfare. He said, "They're all wearing these red coats and they're lined up out there like amazing targets." He changed perception overnight. And then Tom Paine and Jefferson and a number of others wrote amazing, eloquent pamphlets and so forth. And suddenly the reality changed and the British were defeated. Sometimes these days, you got to wonder whether we wouldn't all be better off if they hadn't been defeated. In any case, the war, that revolution, was really fought about economics. Although we'd like to portray it in the history books as being an ideological event, it was really about the East India Company. The East India Company was the most powerful force in the world at the time. It controlled more than half the world's trade. It controlled King George of England. He was also part of it, but it really controlled the British government. It was the reason why there was a Boston Tea Party. It was the reason why there was a revolution. And so after the Americans won, the Continental Congress made sure, they said it's one of their top priorities, that no corporation would ever have that kind of power again. And so they passed a law that no corporation could get a charter in any state, and all the states then passed these laws. No corporation could get a charter unless it guaranteed that it was going to serve a public interest. There was nothing about profit. It had to guarantee that it would serve a public interest. Building bridges or highways or providing goods and services that would make life better for people. And charters lasted on average for 10 years. And then the corporation had to go back and demonstrate that it had served a public interest and guarantee that it would continue to do so. That lasted for 100 years in the United States. Corporations' whole job was to serve the public. It changed in the late 1800s when John D. Rockefeller went to Delaware and New Jersey, and he said, my oil companies can't live under those restrictions. To exploit oil, you got to have more than 10 years. Oh, and the other thing that was in the original charters was no corporation could buy another corporation. That lasted for 100 years. Rockefeller didn't like that either. He said to Delaware and New Jersey, so if you let me incorporate in your states, I'll make a lot of profits, and we'll pay really high taxes to the state, and you legislators can give yourselves big raises, and you can provide lots of wonderful benefits to your families. And so they did it. And one after another, state after state, they followed. And we've gone through iterations. Teddy Roosevelt sort of broke up some of the robber barons, and it went through iterations. By the time I was in business school, we still had remnants of that. I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for investors and also takes good care of his employees, healthcare, retirement pensions, and takes good care of his customers, and takes good care of his community, performs public services, pays taxes. Imagine that. And not only pays taxes, but also gives money to local recreational facilities and educational facilities and so forth. That's what I was taught. Not too long after that, everything changed. The perception of any form of public service changed, and it happened in 1 minute. It happened the minute that Milton Friedman accepted the Nobel Prize in economics. Friedman said a lot of things, but the most important one, the most devastating one, was his statement that the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. That changed everything. And Reagan bought into it, Thatcher bought into it, and every U.S. president since, Democrat and Republican alike, has bought into it, and every European president. It's become the way, and it's created a terrible situation. It's created what I call predatory capitalism and a death economy, an economy that's based on destroying everybody, buying everybody else up. So that law was changed that you could no corporation could buy another corporation. Well, Rockefeller went about buying out the whole oil business. And ever since then, we've had these consolidations, we've had these mammoth organizations. We now have an economic system, a death economy that's based on militarization to a large degree. 60 cents of every U.S. dollar that any one of you as a U.S. citizen pays goes toward the military complex in one way or another, directly or indirectly. 60 cents of every dollar. And it's also based on killing the earth, ravaging our planet, destroying the very resources upon which the economy is based, wiping out the whole system. We can't go on. It cannot continue. We know it can't continue. All these executives know it can't continue. That's what they're telling me. They invite me to speak because they want me to solve that problem. And we will. I think we are going into this consciousness. It's a system that does not work. But out of this, we have the opportunity here to create a peace economy, a life economy, a love economy, if you will. An economy that's based on cleaning up pollution and regenerating devastated environments and recycling, not taking any more out of the earth, using what's already here, new technologies we haven't even conceived of for energy and communications, transportation, banking, everything. We have an incredible opportunity here to move into a new system, and one that's based on much more local, much less consumption, where we recognize that success, that value, success, is all about what we do. It's all about spirituality. It's all about going deep into ourselves and sharing that, sharing the love, sharing peace, sharing what's in us, what you are here for, what this ashram is so good with and represents in such a strong, strong way. That's success, to move into that mindset. I'm very encouraged that we're going to do this, that we're in the process of doing it. And people often ask me after a talk like this, will come up and say, how can you be so optimistic? Well, I'm optimistic because I travel around to a lot of different venues. I don't know how many people are here, a couple of hundred. Not long ago, I spoke in Istanbul to 3,000 corporate executives. And I speak at business schools, and I speak at, like I said, plant consciousness conferences where there's plants on the stage that are hooked up to electrodes and they actually sing. There's all kinds of things going on. They do sing. They're amazing. They're amazing. It makes you wonder whether you really want to be a vegetarian. So next time you come back here, you're going to be breathitarians. And everywhere I go, to all these different venues, people are waking up. People are understanding. People are wanting change. I think that Trump represents that. I think that, there's and what's going on in Brexit, what's going on all over the world, represents terribly dissatisfied people, that we understand it just isn't working. And so some people will go and vote for someone who's very socialistic, like Sanders, and some people will go to someone who's a Nazi fascist, like Trump. But it's all coming from this, no judgment there. It's all coming from this tremendous dissatisfaction. A lot of people didn't vote because they didn't think Hillary was actually going to shake things up. So we're at this time, and as we go on with it, the history of how we look at the history that goes back to 1773, and we move on up through, and we see that at the same time that Milton Friedman came out with this statement about profits, that's when I was an economic hitman. And I'll go into more detail tomorrow, but basically what my job was to identify countries, and my real title was I was chief economist at a major consulting firm. I had about 50 people working for me. And my job, though, was to go to countries, to identify countries that had resources our corporations want, like oil, and arrange huge loans to that country from the World Bank or its sister organizations. But the loans never actually went to the country. Instead, they went to our own corporations, the Bechtels, the Halliburtons, the Brown and Roots, the big engineering firms, and the Westinghouses and GEs that provide equipment. They went to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in those countries, power plants, industrial parks, highways, things that would benefit a few wealthy people in the country, the ones that own the industries, that used the infrastructure, as well as had subcontractors in their family who made a lot of money as subcontractors and providing it, or the Coca-Cola bottling people, or the International Harvester franchises. The few wealthy families made a lot of money Our corporations were the main beneficiaries, and the majority of the people suffered tremendously because of these loans. They didn't get the benefit of the electricity or the highways or the airports. They couldn't get to use them. But money that was intended originally for education, healthcare, and other social services went to pay off the interest on the loans. And the principal was never paid off. That was the plan. That's the way it's supposed to happen. And then we'd go back and say, hey, since you can't pay off your loans, since you owe us all this money, give us a pound of flesh. Sell your oil real cheap to our companies without any environmental or social regulations. Vote with us on the next United Nations vote. Allow us to build a military base on your soil. And in that way, we really created this global empire. It's a corporate empire. And in the few cases where I didn't succeed, and I'll talk more about this in another session, the jackals, where economic hitmen don't succeed, the jackals go in. These are people who either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. Two of my clients, President Jaime Roldos of Ecuador, where I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer, and I'll talk about that experience tomorrow too, and Omar Torrijos, head of state of Panama, they had tremendous integrity. They would not buy into the system. They would not put their countries in this kind of debt. And they were both assassinated. CIA assets took them out because they didn't buy in to the plan. And so in this way, we've created this empire. And it's really not an American empire. It's a corporate empire. The big corporations call the shots. And, it's there. You see Wall Street just breaking through the roof right now because they're so happy. I know a lot of CEOs that think Trump's probably crazy, but it's okay because he's crazy on their side. He's going to cut taxes and regulations. And so the corporations are happy to see this. And we'll see if that continues or not. If they turn against him, he'll go one way or another because corporations control the world today. The good news is that you control corporations. You and I, they cannot prosper without us buying the goods and services, working for them, managing them, investing in them, whatever we do with them. We all have a hand in this. We're all part of this. They depend on us. And you can think of so many corporations that are no longer in existence. Woolworth, Polaroid, Pan American Airlines, Bethlehem Steel, the most powerful corporation in the United States when I was in college, no longer exists. So corporations are very vulnerable. And that's something important to recognize, that it's time that we really insisted that they move into a life economy. We have tremendous power. You have tremendous power. And I don't know how you want to use that, but to recognize the power that you have these days, the power that we as consumers have and that we as employees have. When I was in college, there was apartheid in Africa, South Africa. We boycotted corporations, or threatened to, that supported it. It ended. The rivers in the United States were terribly polluted. The Charles River in Boston, where I went to business school, was so polluted you couldn't walk beside it. And rivers in Ohio were on fire with pollution. We forced corporations to clean them up. We forced corporations to open their doors wider to women and minorities. We forced them to label the number of calories and vitamins and proteins, and we haven't got to the GMOs yet, but that's coming. We've had amazing success. Now it's time to move toward insisting that they support a life economy, that they move away from this idea that their responsibility is to maximize profits into an idea, into a commitment that their responsibility is to serve you, to serve the public. We've got 100 years of experience in that, serving the public. This should be the job of corporations. And incidentally, somebody's going to ask me later that But isn't there a law in the United States that says corporations have to maximize profits? No, there's no such law. A lot of corporations have bylaws that say that, but there's no law that says that whatsoever. We've created, it's a perception, it's a mindset. So here we are in this time of consciousness change. And I think one of the consciousness changes is to get business, and maybe get rid of the big corporations ultimately. That's got to be a goal. But to look at all, I mean, business is there. Business is there. You know, if you go to the little markets in the Bahamas or in Ecuador, or I just came from Guatemala, these little markets where people make their own things and sell them in the market, that's capitalism. It's not predatory capitalism. Capitalism is simply defined as a form of as an economic system where the means of production and trade are not owned by the government. So when people talk about we got to change capitalism, well, there's many forms of capitalism. We've got to change this form, this predatory form of capitalism, which actually has turned that all around and said, instead of that means of production shouldn't be owned by the government, what we now got is a system where the government is owned by business. But you and I can change that. Are you ready to do that? I think one of the things that I have been focusing on recently is something called the Love Summit. As during the introduction was mentioned that I was a founder of I'm a founder of the Pachamama Alliance. How many of you know the Pachamama Alliance? Great. Well, Bill and Lynn Twist and I founded that, and those of you who don't know should go online and check it out, pachamama.org, and dreamchange.org, another organization. Dream Change has an amazing young woman executive director who has just taken it and run with it. And a couple of years ago, she created something called the Love Summit. I love this story because she came up with this idea that what we got to do is get all the millennial corporate executives and entrepreneurs to understand that they've got to move into this new paradigm, this new mindset of love in business. It's got to be about love. It's got to be about serving the public interest. It's got to be about loving people, loving the earth, loving the environment. It's got to be about love. We had a board meeting that's I'm the only old guy on the board, and I'm also the only man on the board. And when she said we're going to call it the Love Summit, I'm like, no, we can't do that. You can't take that to business. Are you kidding? I was overruled. And there's an advertising agency in Portland, Oregon named Wyden Kennedy. It's the largest privately owned advertising agency in the world. It's won more prizes than any other advertising agency in the world. It's an amazing organization. And it's one of its founders, Dan Wyden, has been to the Amazon twice with me. Very good friend. And he's retiring. And on his last trip to the Amazon, he told me he was going to retire. And I said, so what do you want to do next? And he said, I want to be you. I want to travel around the world talking to people. So when Samantha, the executive director, came up with this idea of the Love Summit, she said, do you think Dan Wyden would co-host with you? And I said, well, I'll ask him. So I called him. I said, Dan, hey, do you remember when you said you wanted to be me? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, will you co-host with me this summit we're going to do for business people? And he said, oh, yeah, I'd love to do it. I said, and incidentally, he has a beautiful building in Portland, Oregon. It's a whole city block, and it's got this incredible auditorium that goes all the way up through 5. It's in an atrium. It's just spectacular. I said, and do you think we could use your auditorium to do it? And he said, oh, yeah, we can arrange that. We just have to get the dates worked out. And I said, okay, so I'll say, you're going to co-host it. We're going to do it. And he said, yeah, what are we calling this summit? And I said, the Love Summit. There's dead silence. And after a few minutes, he says, well, John, I don't think I can do that. And I said, Dan, I said the same thing. Why don't you think about it for a few days? Go talk to some of your people. Well, a day later, he calls me back and he says, I've been talking to my people and they're all for it. They said to me, the reason we're here in Portland, Oregon, working for White and Kennedy, and we get half the pay that we'd get if we were in New York, is because we all love each other here. This is a great organization. We work on love. And also, don't you understand that all we do is sell love? We sell, we try to get people to love Nike and their products. So it's about love. But now it's time to wake everybody up and say they got to love the earth. And incidentally, they are Nikes. Dan himself came up with just do it. Does anybody know how that happened? You remember a guy named Bundy, something Bundy? He was a mass murderer. Ted Bundy. You remember him? Ted Bundy. So Dan Wyden has been asked by Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, to come up with a whole new logo, a new expression, a new saying. And they sit around for a week trying to figure this out. They don't come up with anything good. And he's watching the news one night, Dan is, and that day was the day that Ted Bundy was executed. Well, just before the execution, the executioner went up to it and said, Mr. Bundy, do you have any last words? And Bundy said, let's do it. So Dan comes up with, just do it. Next time you put on those Nike shoes, you think about that. Anyway, we did the Love Summit in Portland at Dan's place. He co-hosted it. The mayor of Portland introduced him, and we had some amazing speakers. Ted Bundy was not there, but kind of in spirit somehow, I think the guys had an awakening. Anyway, it was an amazing success, and we're going to do the next one in Cincinnati at the home sponsored by the largest privately owned branding company in the world. And they've said the same thing, basically, that the advertising agency said. They said, what we do is we sell love. We brand people with love, but a lot of it's fake. And we understand that you can't be fake. And so we want to launch a campaign with all of our clients to let them know if they want us to say, love our product, they got to love the earth. Isn't that beautiful? And I'm struck by, I know Swami Vishnu would love this. I think about how after he flew across the Atlantic in the peace plane and landed in Ireland, he walked through the streets of Dublin with the actor Peter Sellers, who probably most of you never ever heard of, but goes back a long time. They walked through the streets of, not Dublin, of Belfast, singing a song that went, something about, I think they constructed it there, but love thy neighbor. Love. It's what this ashram is all about. It's what we're all about. It's what you're here to take out to the world. And it really is about turning a death economy into a peace economy, a love economy, a life economy, an economy that's based on compassion, that's based on cleaning up pollution and regenerating devastated environments and not ripping up the earth and not ripping up people. It's time to move into that. And so we were talking at dinner the other night, but a bunch of the teachers, about how Swami Ramananda was mentioning that how since the election or the inauguration, I'm not sure which, but all the conversations around the tables have been about politics. It's never happened before like that. People used to talk about spirituality or whatever, what they were teaching. Now it's Trump and politics and who became Secretary of State today, and that's good. They were being shaken up. They were moving into this era where we must look at this. Everything's bubbling up to the surface. Am I happy that Trump is president? Absolutely not. Of course not. But there's got to be a reason for it. I believe that this guidance, this is happening for a reason. And out of chaos always comes order. Right, John, you talked about that last year in music. I think you were talking about how out of chaos comes order, and that's quantum physics, it's chaos theory, it's modern psychology. We're in chaos. So how do we want to direct that order? It's up to you. And just in closing, I want to share one prophecy with you, and tomorrow, either at the workshop or tomorrow night, I'm going to talk about the Mayan prophecy, which really goes deep into this. And incidentally, back to that fire ceremony, after they've drawn that circle with the cross and the dots and the circle in it, then they build a fire over that. It's an amazing experience. Come join me. And we'll talk about their prophecy, the prophecy of 2012, which is a very important one tomorrow. But tonight I want to share the prophecy of the eagle and the condor. How many of you know that prophecy? A few of you Pachamama people. Well, maybe not. Okay. So this comes out of the Amazon, probably, we have no idea, but maybe 2,000-3,000 years ago. And it went up into the Andes. It spread through Central America. It impacted way up the Hopi prophecies. It impacted the Algonquin prophecies up where I come from in New Hampshire and New England. It had a huge impact. So it dates back maybe 2,000 years or more. But the prophecy says, back in the midst of history, human societies would decide to take two different paths. One group of people would take the path that they call the path of the condor, the path of the heart, of intuition, of art, of passion, of emotions. We might call it the feminine path. The other half, or part of human society, would take the path that was known as the path of the eagle, the path of the mind, the path of intellect, of science, technology, industry. Maybe we'd call that the male path. And the legend said that, the prophecy said that these two would go in totally different directions for a long, long time. And then in the fourth Pachacuti, and in the language of the Andes, Quechua, a Pachacuti is a 500-year interval. The fourth Pachacuti occurred in what we would consider to be about 1500. In the fourth Pachacuti, the eagle and the condor would come together, and they would clash. And the eagle would be so strong as to practically drive the condor into extinction, but not quite. The prophecy goes on to say 500 years later, in the fifth Pachacuti, roughly the year 2000, the opportunity would arise for the eagle and the condor to soar together in one sky, to dance, to mate, and to produce an offspring that would be higher consciousness. Higher consciousness. This prophecy goes back more than 2,000 years. They saw this time. The Mayan prophecy, which we'll talk about tomorrow, does something similar. The Himalayan, the Buddhist prophet. There's so many prophecies that tell us that we're at this time of rising consciousness. But all the prophecies, none of them say it will automatically happen. They say we must make it happen. We must bring the eagle and the condor together. We must bring heart and mind together. And in fact, we know these prophecies have been realized because 1492, Columbus, the industrialized people of the world, the eagle people practically drove the indigenous people, the condor people, into extinction, but not quite. And then around 2000, the dance began. You know, I started publishing books on shamanism back in the late 80s, and there'd be, you know, if I wrote a book on shamanism and went to a bookstore, there'd be one book on shamanism on the shelf, and it would be mine, and there would only be one of them there, and nobody would buy it, you know. And now, it's everywhere. And it was at that time in the 90s that the shamans really came out of hiding all over Latin America, especially, and beginning more and more in North America and all over the world. Russia, what was the Soviet Union, and so many places, and wanted to share their knowledge. And people from the ego lands took a great interest. So we see how that prophecy has been manifesting. It's been happening. It is happening. It's happening. And the prophecy says, though, we have to make it continue to happen. Bringing together not just the condor people and the ego people, but the condor and ego within us. The mind and the heart within us. The male and the female within us. What you learn here, to bring that together in harmony and balance and take it out to the world, to spread it to the rest of the world. Are you ready to do that? That was weak. I'm not over. I'm not done. I'm going to read you a quote, and then, but so that applause was for you because you're ready to go out and do it, aren't you? That was better. All right. So I'm going to end with a quote, and tomorrow we'll go deeper into what it takes to create a peace, a love economy, and into maybe some more of the prophecies. And at the workshop, we'll go deep into some shape-shifting techniques. I didn't really talk much about shape-shifting here, but we'll do that in the workshops tomorrow and the next day. So this is a quote that's over 200 years old. It's as relevant today as it was then, I think. It happened at a time of great crisis. George Washington had lost just about every battle he fought and should have been terribly discouraged. The Continental Congress wouldn't give him or his men any shoes or clothes or blankets or bullets or anything. And Tom Paine then wrote some amazing words. And Washington, at Christmas time at Valley Forge, had these words read to his entire army. And they're very relevant today. So Tom Paine's, and these were read in December 1775. These are the times that try men's souls. He goes on to say, a generous parent should say, if there must be trouble, let it be in my time, that my child may have peace. If there must be trouble, let it be in our time that our children may have peace. And he goes on to say, I love the person who can smile in trouble, gather strength from distress, and grow strong by reflection. I love the person who can smile in trouble, gather strength from distress, and grow strong by reflection. I think that's something that you're all learning here, that we're all learning here. It's part of the yogic tradition. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious future. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious future. And I think that's why we're all here tonight. So that when my 9-year-old now, grandson, Grant, is my age, a few centuries from now, he'll look back and say, thank you. Thank you all for coming together here, for committing to do all the inner work that you need to do and take all that out into the world and create a loving, peaceful world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.